So in this presentation, we're going to be exploring another one of our textual concepts, representation. But before we do, just a little bit of this concept at work. So I ask you to just consider this drawing here that I've, very crudely put together, and consider, what is this? Now, probably most of you would have at least gathered, even though the drawing's not great, that it is a chair. Maybe you thought the answer is it's a chair. And subconsciously, that's because you know that the broader category is that this is a drawing. It's not supposed to be an actual thing. And I guess on the one hand, I would say you're wrong. It's not a chair, it's a drawing of a chair. So maybe you feel like you've been a bit robbed. If you did answer it's a chair, you've probably felt like, oh, it's a bit of a given that it's a drawing. I shouldn't be expected to have to say it's a drawing of a chair. But it is, I think, an important distinction to make, not just when you're playing little games like this, like Pictionary. I don't think you have to always say it's a picture of blah, blah, blah. But it is a good point to make for our topic today, representation. This idea of the difference between a chair and a drawing of a chair is not my own concept, not a new idea by any stretch. And in fact, it's been the subject of many literary critics over the years, and artistic critics and artists as well. So here we have a painting painted as part of a collection of works entitled The Treachery of Images in 1929. And you can see there in the French, it actually literally translates to "this is not a pipe." And it's to illustrate exactly the same point, that this is not a pipe, it's a painting of a pipe. And this series of artworks really has become a very distinctive iconography to represent actually this movement of talking about the deconstruction of images. So French philosopher Michel Foucault used this particular image as then a springboard for his essays about the separation between things and the signifiers that we use to represent them. So on one hand, to get really technical, all words on one level are just signifiers. It's just a symbol, a visual image that represents a concept or an idea of something. It's not really the thing itself. Like, for instance, the word chair is not a chair, just as the drawing of the chair is not a chair. That might be a little bit of a broad wash for you, and maybe that's gone straight over your head. It is a little bit, kind of dense literary theory to begin our lesson with today. But like I said, our big concept in focus is representation. And as always, I like to break it apart. So that first little prefix there, we kind of think of as with force or repeatedly, present, again, to place before or exhibit in some way, and then ation, our suffix, is a process or action. So the process of kind of repeatedly or with force placing something before an audience perhaps, or exhibiting something. And again, that's not a perfect definition of the word representation. The word representation means more than that, but it can be an illuminating angle. A better definition of representation is the textual concepts definition that we're given. So as you can see, there are two key sections that I've highlighted. We're going to have to tackle them kind of separately. So it says representation is the depiction of a thing, person, or idea in written, visual, performed, or spoken language. In representing, that is, in the act of representing, if you are somebody who's creating something, we, or the author, makes choices from the language offered by these modes. We'll unpack what that means in a second. There are many different ways of seeing the world, as our view is framed by context and culture. We've already kind of talked about the idea that everyone is inherently biased. This means that representation cannot mirror actual reality, but each representation offers a different construction of the world and of experience in it. Let's break apart those two things. We make choices, that is, the author makes choices from the language offered by the mode that they're using. What that really means is that representations or text meanings are limited and impacted by the mode. So consider this, there's no such thing as the same story exactly told in a film version and a novel version. Like the meaning inevitably changes as the representation does. So if you've ever been quite unsatisfied with a film's version of a particular character that you loved in the books, that's partly you yearning and wrestling with this idea that no film version, no actual visible depiction of that character might have ever satisfied you, because that character almost doesn't even exist in that mode and in that form. So that's one thing, that the textual mode that we look at, so whether that's a novel or a film, actually limits the representation in some way because it has specific codes and conventions that we must adhere to. And then the second part of that definition that I want to unpack is that every representation cannot mirror actual reality, but each representation offers a different construction of the world and of experience in it. So that is, no representation is perfect and pure and infallible. All representations are biased, every single one. No text is neutral. But what the representation can do is show you something about the author. So we can see actually the impacting context of a text, often in the work itself. Let's return for a second to the chair and try and apply that principle. So what it's really telling you, it says, what does this representation of a chair say actually about me, the author, the drawer of this chair? So I want you to consider for a second, do all chairs look like this? The answer is no. So this is an unconscious bias that the author pictures a chair like this. That's interesting because I don't actually have a single chair that looks like this. Anywhere near my vicinity, my chair at work, my chairs in my house, no chairs that I own look like this. Actually, none of them are square. All of them are kind of either stools or rounded in some way. They don't really look anything like this. It's interesting that what this picture is, this kind of symbol, this iconography of chair in my head, I don't know. I think it probably comes actually more from drawings of chairs that I've seen. So this representation is a reflection of a particular context that I'm in. That's the first image of a chair that pops into my head. It's also a reflection of my purpose. I was trying to draw in some ways the most recognizable chair that I could for you. And I have in my mind who you are as well. I know that you're, for instance, English speakers. I know that you're in like a Western tradition school education system, and I know that you've encountered probably drawings of chairs that look like this before. So there is a sense in which like this little drawing that I've done tells you a lot actually about me. It tells you more about me than it tells you about chairs. This representation, the symbol, tells you a lot more about the author than it does about the concept of chair. And it's interesting because even if I wanted to come up with a better symbol for chair, it's interesting. I've just done a quick Google search and I searched chair, and these are the first images that come up. So notice that we do get a lot of those square shapes. Whilst like a lot of these chairs are not exactly what, again, the chairs I use regularly are, this is what comes up when I type in chair. Notice I don't type in like Australian chair or I don't know, anything in particular, but Google knows my context, and it's certainly there. And that's notable because if I type in Tanzanian chair or Indian chair, I start to get some shapes and some chairs that really, really don't look like the drawing that I just drew. So there is a sense to which even what I can search, my own, the kind of algorithm of my Google search, limiting my concept of what a chair looks like. I mean, consider here Japanese chair and Thai chair. And again, we've got different shapes again. And it makes me wonder, do people in Thailand, when they search chair, do these images come up? Or does this image, the original kind of Google search image, come up? So there's just all that to say that no, there is no one idea of what chair is. There is no universal chair. And actually, there's not even one universal representation of chair. All representations are constructed of both conscious and unconscious bias. So the conscious bias that I was attributing to that was wholly tied up in my purpose, in trying to draw something that you would quickly recognize as a chair, not necessarily the most detailed chair, not the most accurate chair. I didn't do any shading, for instance. It wasn't based on any particular chair design. It was just, it was simple symbolic iconography. And that does not necessarily mean that I'm telling lies by saying chairs look like this. Just want to put that out there. On some level, we have to accept that bias in a text is unavoidable, and so we need to kind of accommodate that. We need to be aware of the bias and the contextual factors that influence certain representations, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're morally wrong, that they're filled with lies, and that they're unhelpful, or it doesn't negate their capacity to tell the truth. Certainly it does tell my truth. It's a representation of my experience of a drawing of a chair. But it is, like it says here, it is just one of the reasons why the author, that is me in this situation, and this is to kind of go back to our lesson on authority, it is one of the reasons why I can't say, no, this is a chair. I drew it, and so therefore, because I drew it, I can say this is a chair and this is what chairs look like, because that's what I intended it to be. If somebody else sees this image and says, actually, it looks like it's an open book oozing with blood, I can't actually dispute that. If that's what they see, then that's what they see. At the end of the day, this is neither a chair nor an open book oozing with blood. It's literally, how many lines is it? I don't know, maybe 8 or 9 lines drawn in a particular, sequence. And at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's an organization of some lines drawn on a slide. So what those lines represent really comes down to a combination of people, comes down to all the meaning makers in that process. So how do we then evaluate representations? I'm not trying to say that we can throw out all absolute truth again, but I do think that we should endeavor to deconstruct everything to some degree. So we should look for bias. We should be aware that it exists. We should be aware that the author inevitably writes themselves into every story and every image. We should be aware that bias inevitably creeps in. And in advertisements particularly, that's, it's got a particular selling purpose. So it's deliberately biased. It's unashamedly biased. It's certainly their job to try and convince you of something. So it's also important to notice that if you find it hard to see that bias in any of the representations or any of the media around you, it's probable actually that it's not because it's unbiased, but it's actually that you're just consuming media that reinforces beliefs you already had. So if you're looking around and you're going, oh, none of these representations seem to be untrue, much like the chair thing. Let's say you encounter every image of a chair that you ever see looks like every chair that you've ever had in your life. Every time you turn on the TV and you watch an ad, you see people that look like you and talk like you. Every time the government puts out some public service announcement, you kind of feel like it's aimed directly at people like you. Then it's probably just more likely that you are only consuming media that's, kind of tailored to you, rather than that all media actually is in alignment with you. And this idea is called confirmation bias. It's the tendency to consume that which already aligns with our preferences. And this can be a bad thing, actually, because it's not a very good thing to think that everyone in the world agrees with us. It's kind of a recipe for lacking empathy, and a recipe for becoming quite prejudiced, actually, or becoming narrow-minded. It's good to hear counterpoints to our own beliefs, and it is really good to have a variety of friends who think different things to us, to challenge us, so that we can grow and learn. So that's one thing. We should deconstruct everything. We should kind of look for and some specific questions to get us started in that deconstruction process is, who is portrayed or represented visibly in the text? How are these people or actors, if it's a film, who are they supposed to represent more broadly? How do I know that? Like, how are they showing that? A really important question, are these representations accurate or truthful? If you feel like this representation is supposed to represent you, is it true? Like, is it what they're sort of suggesting? Is it reflecting your genuine beliefs? Be very mindful that you might not know people of a certain ethnicity, like be friends with people of a certain race or a certain sexual orientation or a certain family dynamic. And then your opinions about what those people are like and what they believe and how they behave could be largely determined by the representations you see of them. And those representations could be wrong. So you may have prejudiced views towards people because you have consumed heaps and heaps of representations that are actually misleading. So it is really important to deconstruct the representations that we're viewing. And how does this relate to advertising? Let's just have a quick play of this video again.
I suddenly realized we're all in this together.
That feels especially true given what's going on. It is good to know that our super will help us and our economy bounce back. And if you're with one of these, your super is invested in things that create jobs and keep Aussie businesses strong, delivering good long-term returns that benefit all of us. After all, we're all in this together.
Yeah, so let's assume that, like most ads, this is actually not a real person representing the brand. Let's assume that actually this is an actor. In that case, let's apply representation to this. At the end of the day, this is a white woman with an Australian accent. They're the things we kind of know for sure. We don't know very much else about this woman at all. If we assume she is an actor, she's a member of the arts industry. She wears a collared shirt. She uses a laptop. This is a clean and large family home-ish used as a set. And the script says, industry super funds keep Aussie businesses strong. This is kind of a food for thought question. Who is represented here? Who is supposed to look at this and go, that's me? This woman uses an industry super fund and I will too. And how truthful is that representation of this woman, and how truthful is that as a representation of a broader people group? So that's kind of an intro to this big concept, and we're going to be asking these kinds of deconstructing questions about a variety of advertisements that we encounter across this unit.